First off, a huge thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. The peak of wyvern power. It's not a surprise the flying wyverns Akantor or Ukanlos were mistaken for elder dragons or even gods initially. They're as rare as elders too, and every bit as mysterious, but they are still wyverns. So let's theorise on the behaviour and ecology of the black and white gods. Perhaps the most pressing question anyone may have for the duo is what's going on with the tusks and what's going on with the chin. To start with Akantor, despite their huge size and fearsome appearance, the tusks don't seem to be used for predation. When we see it take down a large gravios, the tusks play no real role, with the jaws being used to grab and throttle instead. So already as a downer for hunters, an Akantor with broken tusks likely isn't any less lethal or destructive. Although, if nothing else, it may have less success in producing more Akantors, as the tusks are likely much rather intraspecific weapons, being used to fight other Akantor rather than other monsters. With little ability to self-sharpen, unlike some other tusked animals, Akantor may well have to find sufficient rock surfaces to scrape them on to sharpen up the outer edge, a tactic seen in animals with the same problem. In terms of their pure use, like elephant tusks, they're long and presumably strong enough for wrestling, with two adults locking tusks and pushing to determine a winner via strength. Despite their spear-like shape, attempts to stab may be relatively uncommon, and Akantor more likely use upwards thrusts of the head to slice the bladed edge along an opponent's head, neck or flank. Along with the notion of something like Nergigante using its horns for combat, this seems surprisingly restrained for Akantor, something often known for its violence and belligerence. One theory could be, if tusks are seen in both sexes and Akantor have little sexual dimorphism, Akantor may just generally be unwilling to kill a potential mate. Androgens in the body can be used to further mineralise tusks to protect them from external influences. And if so, then female Akantor may have little outwards differences from the males, and be every bit as aggressive with their pretty solitary lives. The hugeness of the tusks can be partially explained by Akantor's otherwise pretty plain appearance, with little other weaponry compared to many other wyverns. As investment in multiple weapons occurs, weapons tend to be smaller, but having just one allows for a lot of investment into that weapon, which can lead to exceptional sizes as seen in Akantor's tusks. Evolutionarily, the tusks are also interesting. Whilst once wyverns became volant, it seems the weaponization of the tail occurred concurrently or shortly after, and the mouth, as in many animals, is the oldest weapon they have. The evolution of tusks may represent a shift from a far more primitive ancestor, even more so than something like wyvern rex or indeed Akantor itself, to more specialized morphologies that ultimately became true wyverns. Tusks represent several things: teeth that are long-lasting to the point of being there for the animal's whole life, teeth that require specialization and heterodonty in the jaw, and more significant attachment in the soft tissue to keep them growing and connected. Some of these specializations are seen in other wyverns like Barioth, and while some may redevelop adaptations to shed teeth, the impressive tusks of the otherwise primitive Akantor may serve as hallmarks of its first step into true wyvernhood, and ultimately allowed specializations in the jaw and teeth that allowed for significant radiation into other niches. There's also Ukanlos's chin, the equivalent structure in the white god to the tusked black. As a weapon, the chin is still presumably quite sharp, but also can't really be used to lock and shove as tusks can. So rather it could be speculated as a weapon it's more like boar tusks than elephant tusks, and is used to attack the body chiefly, with Ukanlos taking slicing swings at one another's flanks. Considering its shovel-like shape, it could also be Ukanlos trying to flip one another in combat too, and then maul the softer underbelly. The dorsal ridge, assuming it's in good condition, may well serve as a barrier against this, and allow the flipped opponent to better right itself. But as well as a weapon, the chin may also function as a tool. Its resemblance to a big trowel can't be ignored, and in several attacks, Ukanlos does use its chin to unearth chunks of snow and ice. As well as just a snowplow to make traversing snowdrifts on land easier, it could very well serve as a useful digging tool as well. And some of the rest of Ukanlos's morphology adds into this too. As well as its big icebreaker hull, Ukanlos's back does seem to be humped, to a greater extent than would be expected if the hump was just all shell too. And this is something we'd expect for something with such a massive chin that also uses it to clear snow for one reason or another. We do often see this similar shoulder hump in other snow-clearing animals, such as bison, who have to sweep deep snow with their massive heads to clear it for vegetation in winter. And woolly rhino and mammoth are believed to have done the same thing with their long and relatively flat horn, or tusks respectively. In these animals, the hump can also store fat, as it may well do for Ukanlos as well as muscle too. Ukanlos overall does seem to have other adaptations for digging, and like Akantor, its claws are shorter and blunter, literally being referred to as diggers as their item name, and when combined with its forelimbs would presumably make for good shovels. What exactly Ukanlos digs for and where is unknown. In the frigid winters there is presumably fair amounts of carrion beneath the snow. Predator-killed animals they were unable to finish before a blizzard swallowed them, or natural winter mortalities hidden before anyone could get to them, would both be good sources. Even just a few popo would be a decent meal, as would a larger wyvern, and the jackpot of a frozen gammoth would be well worth digging for indeed. It could also be possible it uses all of these tools to dig through otherwise impassable areas of snow and ice too. One quest to take down Ukanlos is apparently preceded by a glacier carving, and that may well have been Ukanlos burrowing straight through it. It is also mentioned that Ukanlos are associated with avalanches, apparently often appearing after them, which could also be Ukanlos just burrowing straight through snowdrifts. Alternatively too, at least some of Ukanlos's digging may occur underwater. As has been said before, little is known about the polar oceans of Monster Hunter, but cold polar waters can yield great bounties of food and nutrients, and marine invertebrates are far less limited by cold temperatures than terrestrial ones. The seas of Monster Hunters may well have its own spider and snow crabs to match the hermitors and cyanotors, or great beds of giant bivalves or mollusks that may be worth digging for in the benthos. The trowel chin would be ideal for Ukanlos to rootle through the benthos mud in search of such proteins too. It could be worth noting Ukanlos does seem somewhat tied to marine areas or possibly aquatic ones in general. In terms of its design and conception, Ukanlos was originally conceived as a cross between a whale and a Dunkleosteus, envisioned as both being migratory and swimming with the large backplates being the more prominent feature to cut through sea ice. Whilst the chin partially took over as Ukanlos was seemingly combined with smaller snow monster ideas, a lot of these features do remain to an extent in Ukanlos, as well as it often being depicted in what seem to be coastal areas like its 3rd and 4th gen arenas. On top of this, Ukanlos does seem to have considerable layers of some form of insulation, possibly fat, and then a different fatty tissue in the muscle of the tail too. The fact something as enormous as Ukanlos needs so much insulation, when smaller wyverns live in canonically colder areas like the hoarfrost with much less insulation, may suggest that Ukanlos habitually undertakes activities that sap heat much quicker, like being underwater regularly. With little known about its ecology otherwise, it's not unreasonable to suggest it may have some aquatic or marine ties. Could this make them harder to hunt? Quite possibly. It's already a handful to just locate either god wyvern. Huge, dangerous, and with their whereabouts highly classified by the guild, perhaps the hunter could get some assistance in finding them from the War Thunder community. War Thunder, for those who don't know, is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game made to date, with over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships of 10 major nations, and spanning from the 1920s to the current day, all rendered in immaculately lifelike detail, both in terms of graphics, sound design and in-game mechanics. If it all sounds a bit complex, then don't worry, because War Thunder comes in 3 modes. If you're new to War Thunder, then I'd recommend starting with the more basic arcade mode. This serves as an entry and is the most fast-paced option, with simplified physics and enhanced vehicle performance. On the other hand, simulator mode is essentially as lifelike as you can get in regards to gameplay, so maybe get some experience first before diving in. Happily, there's also realistic mode, which serves as a halfway point between the two of them, to help you work your way up to simulator or just dial up the realism from arcade. Whichever is to your liking, you can play for free on PC, Xbox and PlayStations 4 and 5, so you're not lacking in ways to play it. In fact, it also comes for mobile too, so you can get busy with dogfights and tank warfare on the daily commute, at the office, or in bed. To do so, just follow the links in the description or my pinned comment to register. On PC and consoles, those who are new or who haven't played in 6 months will also get a massive bonus pack of premium vehicles and in-game currency. So join 70 million other players in PvP battles and hop onto War Thunder today. Both species likely have graviportal skeletons, which is to say one's adapted to dealing with a lot of weight, and both may have completely solid limb bones to provide weight and ballast. As well as being seen in larger animals overall, they can be a key part of reducing buoyancy too, especially for hippos. For one who likely swims, or at least burrows through deep snowdrifts, and for one who wades in viscous molten rock, having some ballast to help you sink and move along the bottom and stop fighting your own buoyancy at the surface would be a helpful adaptation. Such bones are likely widespread across many giant wyverns and monsters, and may be especially prevalent in lava swimmers, due to how heavy you'd need to be to passively displace the viscous rock. Whilst Akantor presumably just crawls along the bottom of lava channels and pools, Ukanlos does seem to get a bit of a shift on when pursuing the player. The undulating movements may suggest a bounding motion under the ice, as he essentially takes giant leaps at the hunter like a playful deer. Ukanlos may go for larger fare in the frigid seas too, and his unique icebreaker back may well help it hunt or even set up ambushes in the polar fast ice. In polar seas, there are openings known as polynyas, the name for any permanent gap in the solid ice. These can be barely tens of meters in diameter to tens of thousands, ranging from an air breather's prison to giant stretches of open water where whole pods of baleen whales can overwinter. Ukanlos's movements through the coastal ice pack may open polynyas, and in turn bring food to it. Polynyas are and can be vital for lots of polar marine life, where it's believed the sunlight keeps primary productivity going, and thus allows for the food chain to continue through the winter, especially when combined with nutrient-rich upwellings in certain areas. It's questionable if Ukanlos is enough of a 4D chess player that it intentionally makes such traps, but it could also be as simple a learned behaviour as clear ice, whales attracted. So any such beneficial habitat modification is accidental, that Ukanlos then reaps the benefits of as it roams either its territory, or the general ice pack, as nomadic voyagers, instinctively travelling in loops to double back on itself and inspect its own pathways for wintering whales. Or it could be that it purposefully clears and maintains a winter polynya, and then lies in wait by it for desperate marine life to show up and be unable to escape. Other Arctic predators like polar bears are well known to use polynyas to hunt trapped whales like belugas, and Ukanlos may have a similar strategy on a far greater scale. It is of course worth the reminder that whales do seem to exist in the world of Monster Hunter, with the boat in 4U being named the Arluk, after the in-universe term for them. Whether this is one specific type of whale or a family name is unknown, but from the general size and shape, it does seem that Arluk may be somewhat similar to Earth whales. The movements of Ukanlos through the fast ice may also create leads as well, the term for temporary openings in the ice like those made by an icebreaker. It's possible whales may swim down these to try and get to larger or less exploited bodies of open water, although they risk becoming trapped if the lead doesn't stay unfrozen long enough. Whales trapped in temporary leads are as good a meal as whales trapped in a permanent polynya, and if they perish when it freezes over, then carrion is still good fare. Large numbers of cetaceans can perish when leads or polynyas freeze over, either naturally for the former or in unusual conditions for the latter, with up to 14 bowhead whales dying in one such event. The 1,000 or so tons of meat such an event would bring, assuming they're adults, would be a fine feast for any Ukanlos that would easily carry it over to the warmer months. For all the Arluk it may eat, the actions of its opening leads and polynyas may pay frigid coastlines back several times over, and cause notable spikes in ecosystem functioning and productivity in the harsh winter months, even providing lucky bounces in especially bad winters when normally reliable polynyas may freeze over. As it isn't just whales, it's also pinnipeds, whole colonies of seabirds, and all the things they eat too. Such actions may also benefit other polar predators like Zamtrios and tidal Najarala, who may also occasionally pay the Ukanlos back as a meal, but ultimately gain more than they lose as a species. And of course, polar communities as well. Indigenous people in the Arctic Circle often hunt whales when in polynyas, and Ukanlos may occasionally help provide such a bounty, or fishing spots for smaller game like fish, seals, or other animals unique to the world of Monster Hunter. Considering their world at present time doesn't seem to have icebreaker ships, for such local peoples the presence of Ukanlos opening leads may well present a major change in circumstance, where before there was just impassable ice. For an individual or an entire group, such changes in circumstance could well be life-changing or even saving too. Despite its negative reputation in the mountainous regions of Poke, and with the Guild, if there are people in Monster Hunter similar to the Inuit, it may well have a different reputation, as neither the terms black or white gods for Akantor and Ukanlos actually seem to come from Poke itself, though that's where the term Akantor comes from at least. It could well be viewed as a god or the avatar of one by such groups for its role in opening the ice, either with the sea ice or more dramatic displays of smashing through glaciers and causing a carving. This is not to say that Ukanlos is having a kumbaya moment anytime soon. Gods in many cultures are capricious, uncaring beings, who will smite someone for just getting in the way. Ukanlos being revered for what it does is not the same as Ukanlos not eating or flattening someone who got unlucky. But it may also not have a universally negative reputation across the assorted cultures of the known world. Akantor's reception, however, from what we've seen, does seem to be regarded as universally negative. With a less productive environment Akantor arguably has less influence over, yet equal belligerence to humans, or other peoples of the Monster Hunter world, Akantor doesn't have much opportunity to make any good impression, and its fear is co-joined with hatred as much as reverence. On land, the slow speed and bulk of such wyverns may make hunting harder, and Ukanlos may occasionally take terrestrial vertebrates, as it does show at least some interest in the hunter. It is also one of the few creatures that can be considered a firm favourite to square off with Gammoth, which would be plenty meat in the event of a successful kill. Akantor is seen to predate Gravios, and in the old world, at least, is likely able to bring down near anything in the volcano, and presumably isn't shy about including elders in its diet. Is Akantor in the new world? Maybe? Whilst Akantor isn't really what you'd call fast, it is worth noting a lot of what he eats isn't especially fast either, and the volcanic regions are filled with monsters who, in their resistance or embrace of magma, have limited other aspects of their morphology like speed. Uragan may actually fare best in that rolling away may well actually be the most successful option to escape, and if their chemical crypsis is sufficient, Basarios may well be able to hide. Large, very slow-moving monsters like Gravios, who Akantor can then also follow into the lava too, are likely the most vulnerable targets, and can only rely on their sleep gases to have a chance of escape. Huge jaws and possibly the strongest acidic saliva presumably make short work of any armour too. Whilst Akantor is apparently a wanderer, at least some of its carved descriptions mention adaptations to lava that likely aren't just grown for fun, and when combined with its presence in places like Ingle Isle, and possibly the Elder's Recess, it may well be resident to the volcanic areas like the Old World volcanic belt. Mentions of the Guild apparently isolating them there, maybe them returning to home territories where they felt safer. But apparently Akantor isn't perfectly safe, and some descriptions of its morphology and carves do seem to suggest that at one point, or possibly still, it was vulnerable to predation. It's hard to think what exactly could predate Akantor, although the most obvious explanation is likely Delamador, who it may be possible it shares the Elder's Recess with. Too small to have any real chance of fighting Delamador off, the spikes making it too difficult to eat, may well be Akantor's best strategy against the giant serpent, and does seem to fit with the description given. Despite being the black and white gods, it does seem they still have a few serious foes in the world of Monster Hunter, and ultimately neither are immune to the hunter. Generally, I really do quite like the god wyverns. I think they really work as the last final bosses of what you could argue as true old gen, before the developers began removing things from the series over just adding. For a series where the core gameplay loop revolves around wyverns first and foremost, it fits that its first era should end with them too. One thing I quite enjoy about both of them is the snippets of personality you get from them too. the curiosity Ukanlos seems to briefly regard the hunter with, and then the same with Akantor's pin attack. The slow push almost giving the impression it's more curious about how much your armor can take before collapsing, and that even as the fight progresses, it still doesn't regard you as a real threat, and more just a puzzle before that puzzle becomes an annoyance. It's fitting to imagine the last equivalent thought its animal brain can muster before winking into oblivion is how an ape with a stick ever managed to fell it. Lore-wise, I'm not sure if they'd ever go to the effort of retcon, but I'd really want them to bin Akantor being a wanderer. With 100% of his appearances being in volcanic areas, volcanic adaptations being planned for the recess, it's essentially already done. Plus it works a lot nicer thematically to have a tyrant of fire and a tyrant of ice, rather than a tyrant of ice and a tyrant of everything but occasionally fire. As a final boss, you'd want Akantor to retain some reverence, rather than them just being fought anywhere, even if it's just in theory. And if that's the case, and they can be so easily booted back to the battleground, then they're hardly that convincing a threat, are they? In terms of modernising the god wyverns, they don't really have anything about them that would hold them back, other than perhaps the need for special arenas. They occupy a weird space where they're arguably the least fantastical of final bosses, but don't suffer from a concurrent drop in fanfare, so it'd be weird to fit them into just normal maps. They're also huge, wider still than Gammoth, and unless a map was built with them in mind, they'd likely not fit it with their attacks anyway. Perhaps if a map was made with Gammoth in mind, then Ukanlos may be able to use it too. I also think it'd just be nice to keep them in their own maps too. I never played Portable Third, but the arenas made for them are pretty stunning. Why they ever stopped letting Ukanlos have the Aurora Borealis localised entirely within his map is beyond me. GU having him shift around the ice flow was quite nice, and I think giving the god wyverns very destructive environmental interactions like that would be pretty cool. Ukanlos smashing apart an ice cavern to the open air, or Akantor cracking the caldera of a sealed volcano to unearth the lava, generally things like that. Story-wise, again, whilst they've been eclipsed by many final bosses since, as now a base requirement is seemingly being able to blow up the universe, they can still serve as story markers as they did in 4U, as either entry to master rank greeters, or key quests to unlock the story further. Fight-wise, Akantor is essentially louder, lethargic Tigrex, and Ukanlos is swimmier Akantor. Just as Narg is fast Tigrex, Ukanlos is cold Akantor. Neither are really challenging fights in terms of the likelihood of them hitting you normally, but more the scale of the health pool and the recklessness that comes with trying to drain it as time runs out, until you upgrade your gear sufficiently, and then both are relatively simple to take down. Both do have moves that are hard to get hit by, and then one that essentially kills you instantly. And overall, whilst they're not bad fights, it's definitely something that would need touching up for the modern era. An increase in speed and overall mobility would be needed, and whilst neither should stop being described as lumbering, they would definitely need to turn and reposition faster, and ideally combine attacks into doing so. There is also water combat. Whilst it's not certain whether Ukanlos burrows through solid snow and pack ice, or if it's ice frozen on top of a water body, but either way it does seem partially tied to cold aquatic environments, hence lots of the theorising in this video. The two are pretty similar fights, and if water combat were ever to return, it's so over for Wilds but you never know for 7, then I do think Ukanlos should be a candidate considered. It'd differentiate from Akantor, expand his fight, and also let him lean more into the environmental destruction too. We'll have to see. A final word on their themes too. Whilst Ukanlos's is often praised, Akantor's isn't. There's probably a whole broader topics video somewhere on my belief that mainline games are about monsters, and portable games are about hunters, but that does boil down to why I think Akantor's theme is what it is, because it's not for him, it's for you. Akantor is viewed as the true summit of Freedom 2, in a way Ukanlos doesn't quite replicate with Freedom Unite. Maybe Ichinose felt the player needed encouragement or congratulation for getting that far, and pushing on to completion. I do agree Ukanlos's theme is better, but I've also felt it was kind of too quick for a monster as slow and lumbering as he is. Once again, a big thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out my links in the pinned comment or description to sign up, be it on Xbox, PlayStation, PC or mobile. The Newcomer bonus pack is for a limited time only, so be sure to grab it before it goes, and get your premium vehicles and in-game currency on PC and console. Anyways, thanks for watching, and as ever a huge thanks to my patrons too. Toxic Wolf, The Superist Duper, Samburgo, K. Sandom, Octavia of the Fifth Fleet, Nickname 3110, Erengar Steiny, Kieran McCarthy, Flygon's Archives, Hui Hui, Jabin, The Belted Horned Warbler, Nathan Cross, Tim Gojira, Waffle, Dapperaptor, Bonecrusher Hyena, Godzilla Prime 2, Original Username, Evilly, Howleth, Archosaur Queen, Tommy Choi, Jacob Wilcox, Seth Fake Last Name, Zacer, Dodecablos, and Bazugazu Bachmatsu, whose generosity helps keep the channel going. Thanks to both Kamen Rider Motun and Dragon Master for the excellent digital artwork of Akantor and Ukanlos made for this video. For more of Kamen's work and the opportunity to commission your own, their links are provided in the description below. Thanks too to I Am the Kaiju King for creating the God Wyvern skulls and the complete Akantor skeleton. For more skeletals, custom artwork and Monster Hunter theories, be sure to follow him on his Tumblr too, linked in the description below. Be sure as well to check out T-Common Shark's channel too, if you liked the custom ecology snippets of Akantor and Ukanlos in this video as well. After the notably chunky herbivore video, I did want something smaller to do, and the God Wyverns were actually always circulating around the roster of potential videos, believe it or not, and what better time to get them out the way now, rather than have them break the flow of Wilds monsters when it comes out. The two are comparatively lore-light when it comes to behaviour and ecology, so this video dealt a lot more with inference, morphology and vibes, much as the next one likely will. It's not canon as usual, and the chunks about Ukanlos swimming are purely hypothetical. This did also become Ukanlos's video much more than Akantor's, but oh well. Hopefully it was still watchable, and hopefully I'll see you for the next Patreon funded one, which will be